Orientation Program, Module 1. The purpose of this module is to introduce to you the basic concepts of international trade. We will specifically be focusing on exporting. We will look at various topics that relate to exporting and exporting opportunities for you as a small business or an entrepreneur. In the next slide, we will highlight the topics that we are going to cover in this course. We're going to cover the following topics under Module 1. We're going to first of all define what is international trade. Then we're going to look at reasons why you can export. We're going to look at benefits or advantages of exporting. We're going to look at international trade complexities. These are unique challenges that you are going to face when you embark on exporting and selling your products to the international market. We're then going to look at factors that influence market potential in international trade. Then we're going to look at regional marketing environments of the world. Then we're going to look at areas of risk as well as opportunity to particular markets. We'll specifically look at how you go about doing a pastel analysis, which is looking at the macro environment of a specific country that you are wanting to export to. We will then close off Module 1. We will look at the readiness to export. We will have a step-by-step checklist of the things that you need to do in order to assess that you are ready to actually indeed export your product or your service. So let's firstly define what is international trade. International trade consists of both importing as well as exporting. It's buying, which is importing, or selling, exporting of goods and services on a global basis. What do we mean by importing? Importing is when we as a country buy goods and services from other countries. We are importing those goods. Exporting is when we as a country sell to other countries our goods and our services. For the purposes of this course, we will specifically be focusing just only on exporting and not importing. To export can be defined as trading of goods and service outside a country or a region. So it's selling our products or services to the international market. It's selling our goods and services outside the borders of our country. Exporting is a key aspect of international trade. It involves the sale, the purchase, the exchange of goods and services across national borders. Exporting is also a major contributor to economic growth. By exporting our goods and services to other countries, we are able to increase our gross domestic products, which is known as our GDP. We are also able to create employment opportunities while we are exporting our goods or our services to other countries. This in turn boosts the economic growth of our country. Hence why we need to encourage more entrepreneurs not only to rely on the domestic market, but to also export their products and service and sell it to the international market. So what are the reasons for exporting? What are the advantages of exporting? Exporting offers a number of benefits for your business or as an entrepreneur. So the reasons for going into exporting are the following. Firstly, it's an opportunity to grow and expand your business. By growing and expanding your business through exporting, you are not only reliant on the domestic market, meaning you are not only reliant on the South African market, but you're able to sell your goods and your services to other countries in the world that can buy your product or your service, which means more customers for your business and greater revenue for your business. Another reason for exporting is to increase revenue as well as profits. Remember, you are increasing the number of customers, meaning that you are increasing your sales, which in turn could lead to increased profits for your business. Another reason for going into exporting is due to increased competition in the domestic market. If you're operating in an industry where there is increased competition, where there are many sellers and producers that are selling similar products to your product that you're currently offering, then it may be a good idea to find an international market that can actually buy your product or your service. Remember, when there is greater competition, it means that you have fewer customers and you're always competing against one another. So if you're operating in an industry where there's a lot of competition, then it's a good idea to also look into exporting to try and find other customers in other countries that would want to buy your product or your service. Another reason for going into exporting is to offset the lack of demand for seasonal products. If you are an entrepreneur or you have a business that is reliant on seasonal products that only sell within a specific season, whether in winter or in summer, and doesn't sell throughout the year, then it's a good idea to always find an international market. Because remember, Northern and Southern Hemisphere has got different seasons. So let's say, for example, you were selling winter coats. You know that winter coats are going to sell in South Africa mostly in winter. During the summer months, your sales will be slightly lower. But if you are exporting, you know that summer and winter is different in the Northern and Southern Hemisphere. So you know that during the summer months in South Africa, where your sales are not as good, you can still continue selling to the Northern Hemisphere countries because they will be buying your coats because it's still winter. So if you have a seasonal product that is dependent, where sales are dependent on the type of season, it's also a good idea to go into exporting because it will offset a lack of demand for your product or your service. Exporting also presents a number of opportunities because remember, here you are dealing with international customers, you're dealing with a bigger customer base. It's a good opportunity and good exposure for your business. Exporting also has its own challenges. These challenges, we're going to refer to them as complexities. We are going to discuss these challenges in the next slide. So entering the international trade space presents a number of complexities for you as an entrepreneur. There are a number of challenges that you face. We are going to look at these complexities and we are going to discuss them. One of these complexities is terrorism. After the September 11 attacks in 2001 in America, international trade was affected negatively because most countries could not trade with other countries due to the terrorist activities. Now, terrorism affects the safety of a country and it also affects the cost of doing business with that country. So, if a country has got a high level of terrorist activities, it's definitely going to cost you more to do business with that country because it's not safe to be doing business within that country. So, when you are selecting a country to export to, be mindful of the terrorist activities within that country and how terrorism actually affects that specific country. So terrorism affects international trade negatively. It's a threat to international trade. Crime is also another challenge that you experience as a result of exporting. For example, if you are going to be transporting your goods via the sea, in certain countries, those ships may be taken over by pirates. Meaning that they could take over your cargo, take over your product, and that's a loss for you as the business. Meaning that if you are going to be shipping via the sea to high risk areas, it could be higher cost in terms of cargo insurance for you as a business. So be mindful of the level of crime in the country that you are wanting to export your product or your service to, as this may be an additional cost to you when it comes to insurance fees. Another complexity is what we refer to as shipping costs. So shipping is how you're going to be transporting your goods to the foreign markets. So you can ship or you can transport using the air or the sea. So each of these two has got its own advantages as well as disadvantages. You need to analyze which one is suitable for your product. Remember, certain products are more suitable for air, for example, perishable products, because they do not last long and they need to be transported quickly, hence you would use the air. Be mindful also of cost. Remember that it may be costly to use air as opposed to using the sea. So look at the characteristic of your product, look at the destination where you are shipping the product to, and then look at which one is more feasible, then select which of the two modes of transport is suitable to transport your product or your service. When it comes to exporting, you need to prepare a number of documents. For example, you need to have contracts between you and the agent that is going to be exporting on your behalf. You need to have documents that relate to transportation. You need to have custom clearance and payments documents. You need to have export permits. You need to have export certificates. So all of this documentation, you must know how to complete it. You must also know about the relevant documentation before you actually start to export. The most important thing when it comes to exporting is finding a market, finding an overseas market. So how can you find an overseas market? You need to conduct market research into foreign markets, analyze these foreign markets to see if there's demand for your product or service. Also look at the level of competition in these foreign markets. Remember, you don't want to go into a market where there's already a large number of producers and sellers and where there is no demand for your product or service, because you're not going to generate enough sales. You can use government agencies because they also conduct market research in terms of finding markets and opportunities in overseas markets. You also need to look at things like licensing and property rights. You must look at things like having an export license, which grants you permission to export. It must also be issued by a licensing agency. You must also look at things like property rights as well as intellectual property. These are very, very important. And remember that intellectual property will differ from country to country, so you need to conduct market research into the various countries that you are wanting to export to. You also need to be mindful of distance as well as time zones. Distance and time zones are going to be very important in terms of transporting as well as shipping your product to countries that you are exporting to. Remember that different regions will have different time zones, and the date and time are going to be affected as a result. So it's important when you're exporting to be mindful of the different time zones, because you are going to use the date and time to calculate certain costs. And if you make certain mistakes in terms of your time zone, your date and time, this can cost you as an exporter. In the next slide, we will continue to unpack the complexities that relate to international trade. In continuing with the various international trade complexities and challenges, these are additional international trade complexities that you may face as an exporter. Climate. So countries have got different climates. So you have countries that have got very dry climates, very wet climates. You need to take this into consideration. If you are going to be exporting perishable products like food, like fresh fruit, then climate is definitely going to affect you. Remember that if you are going to be exporting things like fruit and you're exporting them to very, very hot countries, with a climate that's very, very dry, you need to be mindful how you are going to package, how you're going to transport those products, because they may be damaged if the climate is very, very hot and they're not packaged appropriately and they're not put into refrigerators. So be mindful of the climate when you are selecting a country that you're going to be exporting to. Also look at your product that in relation to the climate. Is it going to be suitable for that specific natural climate that you are exporting to? Culture, language, religion, values, and attitudes. Now, countries are different because they've got different people. These people have got various different cultures, language, religions, and values. So, when you are marketing your product or your service, be mindful of the various different cultures, the various different religions. Remember, in certain religions and in certain cultures, they may not consume certain foods, they may not consume certain goods due to certain religious beliefs. So when you conduct your market research, be mindful of the culture as well as the religious attitudes. Education is also another factor that you need to consider. Remember that the level of education will differ across countries. So when it comes to labeling your product or your service, be mindful on how you label it in terms of the level of education. Can people read and write? What are the levels of literacy amongst the population that in the country that you're exporting to? So be mindful of the level of education. Also, be mindful of social organizations within the countries that you export to. Remember that in certain countries, there are certain roles that are assigned to women. There's also class systems. There are certain roles that are assigned based on gender. So be mindful when it comes to your marketing and how you package those products. Try and understand those social organizations within those countries. Another complexity is technology and material culture. Now, the level of technology and also the usage of technology will differ across different countries. So, when you are wanting to sell your product or service to those countries, research what is the level of technology. Certain products may not be suitable to certain customers in certain countries due to the level of technology. So, be mindful of all of those factors when it comes to you actually selecting the country that you are going to be exporting to. In the next slide, we will continue to unpack more complexities that relate to international trade. Remember that each country is unique, each country is different. So each country will have its own unique laws and it will also have its own unique political environment or landscape. For example, Western countries and certain European countries will be more market driven, they'll be more liberal, they'll be more democratic, and most of their laws will be based on democracy, neoliberal policies. But when it comes to other countries, in certain Asian countries, they've got also their own different political systems. They've got their own political systems. So, for example, a country like Iran, you'd have a legal system and you have a political system that is based more on religion. It's based more on Islam. It's based more on Sharia tradition. So, as an exporter, you need to make sure that you understand the laws as well as the political environment of that country that you're wanting to export to, so that you know how it is going to affect you as a business wanting to go into that country. You must also be mindful of what we call our aesthetics. Aesthetics refers to or relate to things like your senses. They relate to smell, taste, ambience, appreciation of artistic nature. For example, in certain societies, there's appreciation for beautiful designs, certain things that are fashionable. An advert needs to be delivered in good taste. Now, aesthetics are difficult to understand as an exporter. That's why you need to conduct research. What may be beautiful in one country, what may be pleasing in a certain culture or country might be offensive in another. So you must make sure that you conduct your research in order to understand that country or your international market. Now, various countries will have their own business culture. They'll have their own ways in how they conduct themselves in terms of business practice. Business practice includes culture, ethics, competitiveness. As an exporter, you need to understand the business practice of the country that you're wanting to export to. You must also analyze the financial matters and the infrastructure of the country that you are wanting to enter and export to. So to enter the international markets as a business, you need to also have what we call a financial, as well as you need to have the necessary infrastructure. So you must make sure that you've analyzed your costs in terms of how much it is going to cost you to actually start to export. You need to understand various costs such as your export cargo insurance. You also need to understand that when you're exporting, you may require additional machinery, you may require additional infrastructure, and you must make sure that you factored those costs beforehand before you actually start to export. So there's a number of structures that you can use to actually enter the international trade space and begin to export. Firstly, you can use the internet. You can simply have a website where international customers can purchase products and services over the internet using your website. And maybe the product is shipped or is couriered to the customer that makes the purchase. Here you can use e-marketing to actually enter the international trade space. You can then also use exporting. Now, exporting can be direct or indirect. So direct exporting is where you're going to sell directly to the foreign markets. Indirect exporting is where you're going to use an agent. You're going to use an agent that is going to handle exporting on your behalf, and they are going to be claiming a commission on sales that they generate. You could also use what we call as licensing. Licensing specifically refers to where you can create a franchise. You can create various franchises in different countries. A typical example would be our fast food outlets that we have here in South Africa. Most of these fast food outlets are actually, some of them are American, but we have brands like McDonald's that are here. They are international companies, but through licensing, they are able to export their products and their products and the services that they have to various different countries. So you can use licensing. So how does licensing works? It's when your organization is going to charge a royalty fee for the use of the name, the brand, the technology, and the expertise as well. You could also use what we call our international agents or distributors. Agents can be organizations or they can be individuals. They are contracted to your business to market your product or your service to a specific country, but they don't take ownership of the product or service. They're also going to claim a commission on the sales that they generate. Distributors are also like agents, but the major difference is that distributors do take ownership of your product or your service. You could also enter into what we call our strategic alliance. Strategic alliances is partnering with other organizations within the country that you're exporting to. So how can you partner? You can partner and share manufacturing space. You can partner in terms of research and development arrangements. You can partner in terms of distribution alliances. You can also partner on marketing agreements. You still remain independent, but you partner in certain areas just for you to reduce certain costs in terms of entering that international market. You could also go into what we call a joint ventures. Now, joint ventures is where you are going to set up a new company. So your company is going to partner with another organization or with another company in that specific country that you're going to be exporting to, and you are going to divide the ownership of the new company between the two of you. So you could also enter into joint ventures in order to actually enter the international trade space. You could also choose to set up a plant in the country that you're going to be exporting to. So, for example, let's say you are a manufacturer of clothing. Instead of exporting completely finished goods and products for your clothing, you can set up a factory that is going to create or manufacture the clothing in the country that you are exporting to. So that is overseas manufacturer and international trade subsidiary. So you could also set up a plant in the country that you're going to be exporting to. You could also use organizations such as World Trade Point as well as World Trade Organization in terms of entering the international trade space or on beginning to actually export your goods or your service. So you must select the structure that is going to be most suitable and appropriate for your business. And you must also understand the advantages as well as the disadvantages of using a certain structure. When it comes to exporting, you need to look at what we call is market potential. You need to export to a country where there's what we call is market potential, meaning that there are various factors that actually influence market potential. So there are a number of factors that influence market potential in international trade, and you need to consider them as an exporter. You need to first of all consider what we call as demand. Before you enter a market, you need to make sure that there is demand or there is potential demand for your product or service. It's no use entering a market where consumers or customers are not going to buy your product or service because they do not need it. So there must be demand for your product or your service for you to enter that specific market within that specific country. You must also look at the market size as well as expansion. So before entering the global market, you must calculate what is the market size? What is going to be my market share? What can I expect in terms of growth? Can I grow my market size if I enter this market? You must also look at saturation. So what is saturation? Saturation describes a situation where a product has become diffused, meaning that you cannot grow the sales of that specific product any further. So for an example, if you look at developed countries or developed economies, your first world countries, a large number of households own refrigerators, more than 97% own refrigerators. So the level of diffusion is 97%. So that market is already saturated, meaning that you can't grow the sales of refrigerators anymore. You can only grow the sales of refrigerators if you're going to increase the population size. And you're definitely not going to increase the population size enough to actually be able to reduce the level of diffusion and saturation. So it would not be a good idea for you to try and go and enter that market because already the market is saturated. Saturation is going to depend on consumer purchasing, it's going to depend on competition, it's going to depend on pricing as well as technology. So it's not a good idea to enter markets that have become saturated. You also need to consider competitive pressure. So when you are looking at a country to export to, look at what are the number of competitors. Look at the size of distribution of the market. Look at the level of competition. Okay, competition is going to be the toughest where there is a large number of domestic companies that dominate the market because they're going to prevent you from entering that market. So try to find industries or try to find products that are not as competitive because it's going to make your life easier as an exporter to actually enter those countries. You must also look at what we call is comparative advantage. Now, comparative advantage refers to the ability of a firm to be able to produce a good or a service at the lowest cost. So at the lowest cost compared to its competitors. So before you enter a specific market, make sure that you have a comparative advantage. Because if your competitors have got a better comparative advantage over you, chances are you are not going to be able to compete against them effectively. You must also look at things like technology advantage. This refers to having the necessary equipment, the necessary infrastructure to produce a product or service. So as an organization to enter the international market, you must also make sure that you have the technological advantage. You have the necessary machinery, you have the necessary equipment over your competitors. So having a technological advantage could mean that you've got equipment, you've got machinery that is superior, that's faster, that's better than your competitors. So when you are looking at entering a specific international market, make sure that you've looked at that market in terms of demand, in terms of market size, in terms of saturation, in terms of competitive pressure, and also analyze if you've got a comparative advantage or you have a technological advantage. Then you can decide from there whether it is good for you to actually enter that international market. To encourage international trade and to encourage trade amongst countries, there are a number of organizations that have been formed by different countries. These organizations assist to make exporting and international trade easier and also to encourage countries to trade amongst one another. Remember, in certain countries, they may be able to produce certain products more quicker, more cheaply, so it makes sense for them to sell them to other countries at a lower cost and pass on those savings. So here we're going to discuss what are trade blocs, and we're going to speak about two types of trade blocs. So what is a trade bloc? A trade bloc is an organization that is going to be formed by a group of countries, a group of member states. So it's an intergovernmental agreement between various countries, part of regional intergovernmental organization where regional trade barriers, tariffs are removed, reduced, eliminated amongst participating states. So certain member countries will come together and agree that they are going to reduce tariffs or they're going to remove them completely when they are trading with one another in order to encourage trade amongst the member states. Member states will also incur certain benefits as a result of being in a trade bloc. So we have two types of examples of a trade bloc. One of them is a customs union. This is going to be a trade bloc that is going to be composed of a free trade area amongst the member countries or states. Participating countries set up what we call is common external policies. So it's a group of member states that are going to come together, removal of tariffs, and have what we call is a free trade area to actually make trading amongst the two countries easier. We also have what we call is an economic union, which is also an example of a trade bloc, which is composed of common market, but with a customs union. the participant countries have got common policies on product regulation. There's also freedom of movement of goods across the borders. There's also freedom of movement for factors of production. And the purpose of this trade bloc is to actually increase economic efficiency. Examples of trade blocs includes things like your North American Free Trade Agreement, which is called NAFTA, which consists of countries in North America. There's also a European Union, which is made up of European countries that enjoy certain favorable conditions when they are trading with one another. So those are just a few examples. Remember, trade blocs are there to assist member states or member countries. They are there to make the international trade process and exporting more easier. So what you need to do as an entrepreneur, you need to look at which trade blocs South Africa is part of. Because when you are able to analyze which trade bloc South Africa is part of, you can find out which countries are part of that trade bloc and you can try and export to those countries, as the process is going to be more slightly easier as a result of being part of that trade bloc. To continue with trade blocs are free zones. They are there to encourage trade across countries. They are there to encourage you as the SMME to actually export to other countries. A formation of a trade bloc involves a trade agreement on tariffs, trade, and taxes. So there needs to be an agreement in place between the member countries or the member states with regards to the removal of tariffs or the reduction of tariffs or taxes that are incurred when you are exporting. Trade bloc activities have a huge importance on economic and political scenarios. Trade blocs are there to build economic as well as political ties amongst certain states. And most trade blocs are formed amongst neighboring countries to facilitate trade within that specific region. Trade blocs are also there to protect the interest of member countries. So countries that are member of a trade bloc will enjoy certain benefits as opposed to members that are non-member states. For example, they will not be liable to pay taxes on the exports or to pay certain tariffs. There are many regional trading blocs. Examples are your NAFTA, which we spoke about earlier. You've also got your European Union. And for South Africa, you've got your Southern African Customs Union. And for East Africa, you've got your East African Community, which consists of East African countries. So trade blocs are good. They present a number of advantages, but they also present a number of disadvantages as well. Some of these advantages include the fact that there's the removal of tariffs, which means that consumers are able to purchase products at a lower price, which is an opportunity for the exporter. There's also an increased specialization in trade as a result of economies of scale and a decrease in production costs. Remember that if we've got certain countries within the trade bloc that are specialists in producing a certain product and are able to produce it at a lower cost, then that country is able to specialize and produce that product because they're able to produce it at a lower cost than compared to other member states. Trade blocs also lead to an increase in foreign direct investment as a result of the trade bloc, the benefits of economies of the participating countries. This lowers the cost to manufacture locally, so certain costs are lowered with regards to production as a result of being part of a trade bloc. The disadvantages of being part of a trade bloc are going to be the following. A country may lose its sovereignty or its independence as a result of joining the trade bloc. Remember, certain trade blocs become more powerful and may threaten the sovereignty or independence of the country. Trade blocs increase interdependence on economic performance in other countries in the trade bloc. So, for example, if the Eurozone goes into a recession it's going to affect all the countries that are part of the Eurozone. So what happens in one country that is part of the trade bloc begins to affect all of the other countries, and there's a ripple effect. Another disadvantage would be joining a customs union may lead to increased import tariffs, which can lead to trade diversion. Okay, so an example that we have here is when the UK joined the EEC customs union, it's required higher import tariff on imports from former Commonwealth countries. So there are a number of disadvantages that can result that can happen as a result of joining a trade bloc as a country. But there are also a number of advantages and opportunity that are presented as a result of being part of a trade bloc. Entering the export market or the international market presents a number of risks and opportunities. Within various international markets, there's risks and there's opportunities. So as an exporter, you need to analyze what are your risks, what are your opportunities. So how do you go about analyzing your risk and opportunities? You can use what we call is a SWOT analysis and what is a PESTEL analysis. So export involves risk. This means that your business may suffer losses if it enters the export market. However, there's also an opportunity to make profit. So you must identify these risks and you must try and come up with mitigating ways of how you're going to deal with these risks. Also identify your opportunities and also have ways on how you are going to maximize on these opportunities. So there are a number of ways to identify risks and opportunities. You can use what we call is a PESTEL analysis or what we call as a SWOT analysis. PESTEL analysis is where you look at your external environment, which we call is your macro environment. So you look at the political, the economic, the social, the technological, the legal, and the ecological environment. And you analyze it. You analyze it in terms of the country that you are wanting to export to and understand that PESTEL environment and do an analysis. You could also do what we call is a SWOT analysis, where you analyze your organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. As an SMME, you should consider the risks and the opportunities before you enter the export market, meaning that you should do a PESTEL analysis as well as a SWOT analysis before you enter the export market. The pastel analysis, as highlighted earlier, is looking at the macro environment. It's looking at the external environment. Remember that as a business owner or as an entrepreneur, you cannot control what happens in the macro or the external environment. We are going to look at the first few sections of pastel on the slide. We're going to look at the political as well as the economic environment. So when you've identified a certain country or a list of countries that you would like to export to, you need to conduct a pastel analysis. From this pastel analysis, you can either have what we call threats or opportunities. So in the political environment is going to refer to things such as government legislation, government laws, the type of government that country has. So questions that you can ask yourself or questions that you can research on that specific country. First of all, you need to look at what we call is political stability. So how stable is the political environment of that country? Remember, you don't want to go into a country where the political environment is fairly unstable, as that is going to cost you as a business. You also need to look at what are the taxation policies, what are the laws when it comes to tax, because this is going to affect your tariffs as well as the taxes that you're going to have to pay. You also need to check if that specific country is part of a trade bloc. Does it have trade agreements? Is it part of the EU? Is it part of NAFTA? Because remember, if it's part of a certain trade bloc and you're also part of that trade bloc, there are certain benefits that you can incur as an exporter. You must also look at what is that country's foreign trade regulations. What are its laws in terms of exports or international trade? Also look at what's the country's social welfare policies, as this can influence the type of product or service that you are wanting to sell. When it comes to the economic environment, you need to analyze the economic environment of the country. So you need to analyze all factors that relate to the economy. You need to look at things like the country's interest rates that they're charging. You need to look at the level of inflation in that country. You need to look at the possible growth rates of the market. You need to look at what are the local employment levels among the citizens. You also need to look at things like their gross domestic products, their GDP. Also look at what is the current exchange rates. Also look at the type of currency that country actually uses. The S of the pastel analysis stands for social or socio-cultural factors. So what are social-cultural factors? These refer to lifestyle trends, they refer to demographics, they refer to level of education, they refer to income. These are all factors that are going to affect your target market. They are going to affect your customer. And you need to be able to understand all of these factors so that you create a product or a service that is going to fit the social cultural factors of your target market. So when it comes to social cultural factors, you need to conduct research on social cultural factors of that specific country and also of the specific target market that you're going to be targeting there. So you need to understand what are the local lifestyle trends, what are the demographics in terms of age, gender, income, what are the dominant religious beliefs, what influence consumers' attitudes and opinions, what is the attitude of the population towards work and towards leisure, as all of these impact greatly on the purchasing patterns as well as the behavioral patterns to certain products and services. You also need to look at the technological environment. Remember, when you are wanting to export to a certain country, you must make sure that the product that you're going to be exporting is going to be compatible. If it's a product that is going to require certain technological infrastructure, you must make sure that that country has got that necessary technology infrastructure. So questions that you can ask there when you're conducting research, you can look at to what level local government is funding industry research, what is the local government's interest focus on technology. You could also look at things that relate to intellectual property. You could also look at things like disruptive technologies. You could also look at things such as infrastructure in terms of technology, and also the level and the type of technology that is being used in that specific country that you are wanting to export to. You also need to look at the legal and the environmental or the ecological environment of a specific country. So when it comes to the environment or the ecological environment, within that specific country, you need to look at what are the local environmental issues. So each country will have its own unique environmental challenges. You need to understand these, as these can impact on how you need to manufacture your product, how you need to package your product. Remember, in certain countries, they'll have what we call a green consumers or environmentally conscious consumers that will look at the packaging of the product. Is it recyclable? Is it recyclable? Is it not harmful to the environment? You also need to look at the level of environmental activism in the country. Certain countries have got greater environmental activism, meaning that you're going to need to be very, very careful when it comes to how you're going to be manufacturing your product, and also whether you are producing products that are environmentally friendly, and also how you are disposing of certain waste when it comes to manufacturing your product or service. You must also look at regulations within that country that relate to the ecological environment. So what are the environmental laws and how do they impact on the manufacturing of your product or your service? Lastly, you need to look at the legal environment. You need to understand the various laws within the countries that you're wanting to export to. You also need to understand how they are going to apply to you. You also need to understand laws relating to intellectual property. You also need to understand the relevant consumer laws. You also need to understand laws relating to employment, occupational health, and safety, especially if you're planning to have a production plant within the country that you're going to export to. So once you've done your pastel analysis, you will have detailed findings on each of the various factors. And remember, each of the various factors can also bring about an opportunity for your business, or they could also bring about a threat or threats for your business. But it's important that you do a pastel analysis of the country or the international market that you are wanting to go into. Part of exporting means understanding and knowing your business very, very well before you actually start to export. There is a tool that's referred to as a SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. A SWOT analysis is a tool that allows you as an entrepreneur to create a picture of your business's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, what are opportunities? What are threats? What are weaknesses? What are strengths? We're going to unpack what each of these factors actually mean. So before you actually go into exporting, part of your strategic planning should be to actually prepare a SWOT analysis of your business. So for your SWOT analysis, we have what we call our internal factors. Internal factors are your strengths and your weaknesses. These are factors that you can control as an entrepreneur. So what are strengths? Strengths can be things like having business resources, having skills, having the necessary abilities. It's things that you do well as a business, things that set you apart from your competitors. Weaknesses, on the other hand, are the opposite of strengths. There are areas of your company that you need to improve in. So, for example, a weakness could be that you have poor quality controls, you have insufficient staff, you have staff that's poorly trained. So, when you're compiling your strengths and your weaknesses, make sure that you look at your business and analyze which are the areas that we are good at that set us apart from our competitors. Those would be your strengths. Which areas are you lacking in? Which areas do you think need to be improved upon? And you don't just only list your strengths and your weaknesses, you also think of ways of how you are going to deal with your weaknesses. We then have what we call our external factors. External factors you cannot control. They are not within your environment as an entrepreneur. External factors come from the macro environment. They come from outside forces or the outside environment. The external factors refer to your opportunities and your threats. So what are opportunities? Opportunities are going to be situations and your threats. So what are opportunities? Opportunities are going to be situations in the external environment that the business can exploit. So an example of an opportunity would be identifying and targeting a new business sector, finding a new market for your business. A threat are situations, again, also in the external environment which the firm cannot exploit, and hence a threat is harmful to the business. And so an example of a threat would be increasing competition in your industry. That's a threat to you because it's taking away customers from your business. So you must have ways of how you are going to maximize on your opportunities, but also how you are going to deal with your threats. So how do we do a SWOT analysis? You conduct a SWOT analysis with a team of your employees. If you're the only person in your business, then you'll have to do the SWOT analysis on your own. You may seek external assistance while compiling your SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis, in essence, is like a brainstorming session. You sit down as a group and you brainstorm ideas as to what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are our opportunities, what are our threats. Once you have all of that information, you then incorporate it into a SWOT analysis. And then you use the SWOT analysis as part of your planning, as part of your strategic planning. You also have an action plan of how you're going to address weaknesses, opportunities, as well as threats. So when do you do a SWOT analysis? SWOT analysis can be done at any stage of the business, whether it's when you're starting a business, whether your business has matured, whether you're wanting to now venture into exporting, you can do a SWOT analysis. But your SWOT analysis needs to be reviewed. It needs to be checked annually because remember, your environment in which you're operating in is constantly changing each and every year. So there may be certain areas of the SWOT analysis that you may need to change. So SWOT analysis and exporting. Before you go into exporting, you need to have conducted a SWOT analysis. The SWOT analysis is going to assist you to actually plan for your export. It's going to assist you to identify areas that you're good at, and it's also going to assist you to identify areas that you are not so good at, so you are able to deal with those. A SWOT analysis is also a useful method that summarizes information that you're generating while you are planning for your exporting. So how can you compile a good or a successful SWOT analysis? Make sure that you are realistic about areas of your SWOT analysis. Make sure that you are realistic about your weaknesses, about your strengths, about your opportunities, and your threats. Be specific. Clearly define what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are your opportunities and threats. Always analyze your business in relation to your competitors. So always make a comparison of your business aligned to your competitors. And lastly, keep your SWOT analysis short and simple. Make sure that you can understand your SWOT analysis. To practice what we've discussed with regards to SWOT analysis, we would like you to prepare your own SWOT analysis for your business. So you're going to complete a SWOT analysis for your business under each of the areas, under strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Make sure that you list at least 4 items under each one. Then detail how you are going to address your weaknesses as well as your threats. This is going to assist you in compiling an action plan that is going to assist you in terms of actually dealing with the weaknesses as well as the threats that you are currently facing in your business. When it comes to readiness for export, before you even go into exporting, you must first of all make sure that your business has got necessary policies, it has the necessary processes, it has the necessary procedures. You must also make sure that within your business you have the necessary knowledge and you have the necessary skills that are necessary to actually start to export. So make sure that you have those in place. So how do we assess whether you are actually ready to export? So you assess export readiness by going through the following steps. So as a business, you need to do the following to assess your export readiness. First of all, you need to do what we call is country identification. So you need to identify a list of countries that you think you can export your product or your service to. So you'll conduct research and you'll come up with a list of potential countries where you can sell your product or service to. Identify a list of countries where there's going to be demand, where customers are actually going to want to buy your product or your service. When you identify your countries, be mindful of the country's political as well as economic stability or instability, because that is going to affect your business as well. Remember, you want to go into a country where the climate to actually do business is actually favorable for you. Once you've identified the list of potential countries where you can sell your product or service to, you then move to the next step, which is called preliminary screening. Under preliminary screening, you are going to score the list of countries that you generated earlier. You're going to score each country based on macro factors. What are macro factors? You're going to score each country based on the economic, the political, the social, the technological, the legal, and the ecological environment. So you're going to look at the political situation, the economic situation, the level of technology, the ecological environments in those countries, and you're going to score them. While doing the scoring, you are eliminating countries where you think that the political environment, the economic environment is not actually conducive for you to actually do business. You then move on to the next step. Remember, at this step, you've got a fewer list of countries because you are eliminating at each step. You're now going to do what we call as in-depth screening. Here you should have a shorter list than at the previous step. What you're going to be doing here now is you're going to be assessing the countries in terms of feasibility. So you're going to look at each country whether it actually makes financial sense to actually export to these countries. Here you're going to look, for example, at how much you are going to be charging for your product or service to these countries or to the customers in those specific countries, how you're going to distribute your product or service in these countries. You're also going to look at how you're going to communicate with your customers or your target markets in these countries. You then move on to the next step, which is the final selection. Here you should have a short list of potential countries, but on this list now, you are also now going to do scoring as well. But your scoring is going to be based on the level of competition. You're going to look within those countries, what is the level of competition within your specific industry? So you're going to look at competitors within those countries and you're going to score the different countries. Once you're done with that, you are then going to move on to the next step, which we call direct experience. Direct experience is where you are going to now visit the list of potential customers, the list of potential countries that are left on your list. Why do you have to visit these countries, you may ask? You visit them to experience the culture, to also experience how they actually do business. So it's important that you visit these countries so that you are able to immerse yourself into the culture as well as the business practices of those countries. So it's not just enough to do all of those steps. You also need to check what we call our pricing influences. Now, when it comes to pricing for exporting, there are a number of factors that are going to influence how you price. First of all, you're going to need to take into consideration how much it costs you to make the product. You're going to need to consider how you're going to distribute and market the product. You also need to consider whether you are going to have a production plant within the countries that you are going to be selling to, or you're going to remain in your domestic country and sell the finished product. That's going to influence your price. The changes in or the fluctuations in currencies is also going to influence your price. Your price is also going to be influenced by how much the customer is willing to pay in the international market. Other factors that are going to influence your price are going to be economic factors as well as political factors. You also need to consider, when it comes to readiness, what we call is product documentation. Okay? In order to export, you need to prepare a number of documents. One of these documents is going to be a contract between your business and the agent. On this agreement, make sure that you outline the relationship of both parties. Make sure that you also address payment issues. You also then need to decide what type of approach are you going to be using. Is it going to be indirect exporting or is it going to be direct exporting? Are you going to be using an agent? Are you going to be using a distributor? Are you going to partner with another domestic company that is going to carry your products or service in their stores? Or are you going to go into what we call a joint exporting or joint alliances? So you also need to decide on the approach that you are going to use to enter the export market. So in assessing your readiness to export, make sure that you look at all of these factors so that you actually check that you actually are ready to actually indeed export your product or your service. Part of export readiness is also compiling what we call is an export marketing plan. An export marketing plan is an important document that you need to compile before you actually start to export. In your export marketing plan, you need to make sure that you have the following. You need to have market objectives. These are going to be your goals. Remember, they need to be smart. You also need to have market research. You need to have conducted market research on the international market that you're going to be selling your product or your service to. You need to have clearly defined your international market, defined who's your target market and clearly segmented your target market. You need to decide on the distribution channel. How are you going to distribute your product or service? Remember, we discussed direct exporting and indirect exporting. Are you going to be using an agent or a distributor? Are you going to set up a plant within the country that you're exporting to? Are you going to go into a joint alliance with other companies in the country that you are exporting to? You must also highlight how you're going to advertise and promote your product or your service. What sort of medium are you going to be using in terms of advertising and promoting your product or your service to the international market? You also need to detail how you are going to segment your target market. How are you going to divide your target market in terms of geography, in terms of psychographics, and in terms of the various different market segments. You also need to decide how you're going to position your product or service. You also need to define what are going to be your product features, what are going to be your product characteristics. And you also need to detail how is it that you're going to be pricing your product or your service. Before you enter the market, make sure that you've compiled your export marketing plan and you've conducted enough research to actually compile your export marketing plan. In conclusion, in this video, we first of all looked at what are the reasons for going into exporting. We said that exporting presents a number of benefits as well as opportunities to actually grow your business beyond the borders of your domestic country. It allows you to get customers from the international market and not only be reliant on customers in the domestic market. We said that international trade, specifically exporting, has also got a number of challenges. We refer to those challenges as complexities. And we said that you need to assess those complexities before you actually venture into the export market. We spoke about various complexities and challenges relating from terrorism, relating to shipping complexities. There was various challenges that you face as a result of actually entering the export market, and you need to understand those challenges. As an SMME, we also say that you need to understand the macro environment of the country that you intend to export your products and services to. We spoke about understanding the political, the economic, the social, the legal, as well as the ecological environment. You needed to analyze it before you actually start to actually sell your products and services to that country. We also looked at export readiness, and we said that in assessing your export readiness, you needed to first of all identify a list of countries that you are wanting to export your product or your service to. You then needed to screen the list of countries so that you come up with a shorter list of countries that you could now then say they are your potential customers that you are going to export your products or services to. We also spoke about pricing. We spoke about factors that influence pricing for that influence pricing when it comes to exporting. We also spoke about product documentation. You needed to have the necessary documentation in order to start to exporting. And then lastly, we said that it's important that you prepare an export marketing plan. We said that you need to prepare this export marketing plan before you actually start to export. So the purpose of the module was just to introduce to you the basic concepts of international trade, specifically focusing on exporting. So before we end off this module 1, we would like to alert you that we have got other awareness presentations that you may be interested in looking at or watching. They're also in a video format like this one. We have listed them for you. We have basic customer service. We've also got basic bookkeeping awareness training. So if you are interested, you can also view these. Should you have any questions, should you have any queries regarding any content that was discussed for this module, please feel free to send us an email at onlinetrainingfeedback@seda.org.za. When you're sending the email, on the subject line, please indicate the name of the training. For this training, it would be export orientation training. Also include the module, so it would be export orientation module 1. Then you can write your question, comments, or your query, or we welcome any suggestions on how we can improve the training as well for you. This then brings us to the end of this video. Thank you very much for listening and watching. We really do appreciate your time, and we hope that we've assisted you in terms of introducing to you the basic concepts of exporting.